First, on this edition's Week of Woe, Donald J. Trump says he never heard of the term burner phone when asked. I think just about everybody in the world has heard of a burner phone, unless you've been under a rock for the last few years. Anybody, of course, except Donald J. Trump. Never heard of a burner phone, never had one, said Trump. But out of the fog of Donald J. Trump's brain comes his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton. John Bolton says that him and Trump talked about burner phones for hours at one time. So, who to believe? Of course, Donald J. Trump is an infamous liar who would win in any lie-off and could lie with the best of them. But then, John Bolton has incentive to lie since he put a book out there and wants people to buy it. So again, who to believe? Well, folks, I pick Donald J. Trump as the liar. Next up on this edition's Week of Woe, we have Letitia James, Attorney General of New York. She is a Democrat and apparently a woman who doesn't back down too easily. She comes out every couple of weeks or so with some new revelations about Trump's scheme to defraud the government and banks making loans to him by lowering the price of his properties for tax purposes, but saying that they are worth millions more than they actually were to get good interest rates at banks and therefore help them get millions of dollars in loans by saying that these properties are worth more than they actually were. Trump is always firing shots saying that her investigation on him is politically motivated and therefore a witch hunt. Letitia fired back this week, accusing Trump of hiding business documents and demanding again that Donald J. Trump, Ivanka, and Donald J. Trump Jr. all sit for depositions in the case. We'll see how this turns out, guys, but since this is a civil case, Trump will not have to spend any time in jail over it, but it will hit him where it hurts. As Trump defrauded New York from hundreds of millions of dollars, he will have to pay penalty and interest on those illegal gains that he received from lying about his properties. Wow, can't wait to see what the outcome of this case is going to be, huh guys? Finally, on this edition's Week of Woe, one of Putin's ministers, Anatoly Chubais, has quit. The special envoy to relations with international organizations quit his post this week, citing his and Putin's disagreements over the war in Ukraine. It is not known where he landed after leaving Russia, but I'm sure that Putin will retaliate with some ricin in his umbrella or some uranium in his drink, but he will retaliate. The oligarchs seem to be rising up against their boss because of the rising deaths of the Russian soldiers and the enormous loss of equipment in fighting Ukraine, which should have been a walk in the park for the Russian bear, but it turned out that the Ukrainians were hiding a honey badger, waiting to unleash it on the unsuspecting Russians. Well, guys, that's it for this edition's Week of Woe. See you again next week for another edition. In the meantime, let's dive deep into the crazy lady Virginia Thomas. This crackhead is the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, a right-winger who would do anything for his best friend Ginni, who was breaking the law on January 6, 2021.
Justice Clarence Thomas is compromised. On January 19, 2022, Thomas was the only Supreme Court justice willing to help Trump and his allies hide from justice over the January 6th insurrection. Thomas did not hide that he was willing to grant Trump's request for secrecy, but it wasn't just to protect Trump and his conspirators. It was to protect his wife, Ginni Thomas. A radical right-wing activist, Ginni Thomas has openly applauded rebellion in the past.
I think people are rebelling and there's a big tidal wave coming. I think the Democrats are pretty worried about what's coming.
And the lead up to January 6th was no different. Ginni Thomas used her direct line to Trump's White House to push for the overturning of a free and fair election, even attending the rally that would ultimately end in an attack on the U.S. Capitol. None of this would be known if Justice Thomas had gotten his way. The January 6th Commission can't do their job if one of the most powerful men in the country is using his seat to protect his best friend. Clarence Thomas must recuse himself because he took an oath to protect the Constitution, not his wife.
This is a solid video from the Lincoln Project. I think it points out some of the glaring issues about what Clarence Thomas did in trying to hide the truth in her role in the January 6th insurrection from the American people, breaking his oath to the Constitution, and smearing any legacy he might have had, all for his beloved Ginni. In the 1980s, before Virginia Ginni Thomas was more infamous in politics, she was a congressional aide. Ginni took self-awareness training from LifeSpring, which she eventually left, strongly believing it to be a cult. LifeSpring had distanced Ginni away from her friends and family, which finally caused her departure from the organization, at one point hiding in another part of the United States to avoid a constant barrage of phone calls from the LifeSpring members. After leaving LifeSpring in 1985, she sought counseling and eventually joined the Cult Awareness Network.
One eternity later.
Following these events, Virginia married Clarence Thomas in 1987. In 1991, Thomas returned to government service in the Legislative Affairs Office of the U.S. Department of Labor. That year, Ginni's husband, Clarence Cover-Up Thomas, was nominated by the Shrub Sr., also known as George H.W. Bush, to fill the open seat on the U.S. Supreme Court, left by the retirement of Justice Thurgood Marshall. Ginni also attended the controversial U.S. Senate confirmation hearings and stood by her husband as he was accused of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment seems to run in the Republican Party.
Are you a scorned woman?
What was the content of what he said?
Wasn't it included when you talked to the FBI? Relative to the area of civil rights?
Has anybody promised you anything by coming forth with this?
In 1991, one woman under the hot glare of television lights and 14 men at a Supreme Court confirmation hearing.
Do you have a martyr complex?
No, I don't.
Anita Hill answering question after question from skeptical and sometimes hostile senators about the sexual harassment she says she suffered at the hands of Supreme Court nominee Judge Clarence Thomas.
My working relationship became even more strained when Judge Thomas began to use work situations to discuss sex.
Thomas has always emphatically denied Hill's claims, and he was confirmed to the Supreme Court despite her allegations.
Earlier today, Clarence Thomas and his wife, along with President and Mrs. Bush and some 300 friends and family of Justice Thomas, gathered on the south lawn of the White House for the first of two swearing-in ceremonies. These two ceremonies precede the seating of Justice Thomas on the Supreme Court of the United States. Up next, we bring you that White House ceremony where Thomas took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States as a government official. The oath was administered by Supreme Court Associate Justice Byron White. On November 1st, Mr. Thomas will take a judicial oath in a more private ceremony at the Supreme Court building.
A fun fact, as well as a moment of clairvoyance for the future, when Clarence was about to be sworn in, several Democratic senators questioned, and rightfully so I think, whether her job in the Labor Department could cause a conflict of interest for her husband if he were seated on the Supreme Court. And look how that turned out. Not very good. Cover-up Clarence doing his job. Well, of course, the signs of her warped perspective and malpractice were always there. When in 2016 she established a group called Liberty Central to oppose what Ginni would describe as leftist tyranny of Barack Obama and other congressional Democrats, which she saw as going against the core founding principles of the nation, as well as her ridiculous, borderline inappropriate quote in her Hannity interview in 2010, where she stated in reply to questions and concerns about potential conflicts of interest due to her husband's position, she said, "There's a lot of judicial wives and husbands out there causing trouble. I'm just one of many." Liberty Central ceased operations in 2012. Thank goodness for that. Bunch of crazies and her involved in it, or the leader of it. When Biden won in 2020, she seems to have fallen off the edge, just as her Führer, Donald J. Trump. She went and joined the mob in the 2021 January 6th insurrection. She, at the time, was apparently texting her best friend and husband, Clarence Thomas, who is, again, an Associate Supreme Court Justice. She also happened to be texting Mark Meadows, Trump's chief of staff, urging him to continue the fight, and said such things as, "It takes time for the Army to mobilize," and to pursue unrelenting efforts by White House chief of staff to overturn the 2020 election. This woman, like I said before, this woman was crazy and still is. Clarence Thomas is this woman's best friend, and he also happens to be a Supreme Court Justice. Mr. Thomas should have recused himself instead of making a judgment on the documents that Donald Trump wanted to not show the January 6th Commission. He is the only justice on the Supreme Court out of the 9 justices that said no to showing the documents to the January 6th Commission. He didn't recuse himself, so he is in trouble for this. Congress is looking into his involvement in the January 6th insurrection, whether he knew about it or whether he talked to his wife about it. Congress is looking into whether or not they should bring charges against him or make new laws governing the Supreme Court, as there is no law now that governs them except for the one that states that they should recuse themselves, anything to be seen as conflict of interest. But he did not recuse himself. She, like her husband Clarence, should be facing the consequences of her actions on January 6th that are determined to be illegal. Clarence should also face consequences for not recusing himself and by violating his oath of office, but to his detriment, he did keep his marriage vows to Ginni. Well, guys, that's it for this week's edition of Undercover Lies. Thanks for stopping by. Please hit the like button and please remember to subscribe to Undercover Lies. See you again next week for another edition where we give you another look at Donald J. Trump's rabbit hole. Until then, remember, America needs your vote.